All right, Matt and JD are back. 44th FIDE Chess Olympiad 2022, round number 5 recap. Today we're going to look at Magnus Carlsen again in the Norway against Zambia match.
Yeah, this is like he played like the perfect counterpart game to what we just looked at. So he's got the black side now, and just jumping into the game, like we had an opportunity that if White had chose to play this Bishop G5, he could have transposed and played exactly what Magnus just played as White yesterday. But I think it's pretty clear he didn't look at that Magnus game because he went a whole different direction here and played E3. But if we were to look at this Bishop G5 line a little bit, I mean, this fits right into the repertoire that we're giving against the Nimzo Indian. So this is sort of like a Ragozin, Queen's Gambit, Nimzo, all that stuff kind of floats together a little bit. But yeah, Bishop G5, just preventing this knight E4 maneuver. And it could have ended up with a game that went very, very similar to what Magnus played yesterday, but instead chooses this E3 move. What do you think of that move?
I think usually playing E3 without knight to F3 makes a little bit more sense. The combination of E3 and knight F3 just doesn't really score as well in the database, and yet you see it a little less often. But we're going to see something pretty interesting in someone who's played the same line coming up in a couple moves. So we have
Yeah.
castle, pawn to A3, and how do the stats look after this move?
Pretty terrible. Like black's already scoring 50% in this. Like white's playing this way with this E3 and then following up with A3, essentially shutting in your own bishop. Yeah, it's already an even Stevens games. White's forfeited any opportunity for an advantage from the white pieces.
And I have a book called E3 Poison by Axel Smith. He's one of my
Uh-huh.
favorite chess authors. And he has a lot of systems like this where white just doesn't play very aggressive and just does combination of E3, D4, knight F3, keep that bishop trapped. And I think it is a way to just kind of play a chess game, not get into any trouble as white. But I think, playing against Magnus, you don't want to give him these slight advantages right out of the opening. And one interesting thing we saw here when we looked at the stats, Carlsen actually played this 3 times against Anish Giri. Carlsen was white in some online blitz games back in 2018. So just kind of cool to see the colors reversed. And I wonder if Gillen, the white player, actually knew about that.
Yeah, maybe not. Whenever I'm in these situations where I have this bishop trapped back behind this pawn, I'm often looking to play this F3 E4 business to try to get my bishop out.
Yeah, that's because you're on the ChessGoals repertoire.
Yeah.
Let me make a
True,
quick
true, true.
plug. They're 25% off right now, all the ChessGoals courses, and there's a link in the description. So you guys should check it out. Money back guarantee, and you can preview them for free if you want.
So yeah, Magnus opts to just lop the bishop off, so we get a little bit of pawn structure damage. Again, this sort of induces another pawn on a dark square, just hemming in this bishop even just a bit more. And now c5 happens, exploding in the center, which is quite nice. Notice that white has avoided capturing here, letting this bishop out. But c5 is going to give black all the space and comfort that he really wants. And I think that white immediately kind of goes wrong here. They play a move that's been rarely played. And after bishop d3, which seems natural because we just want a castle, I mean, black is better. Black is, this position has been reached several times. Black is winning 40%. That doesn't include all the percent of times that black has managed to draw this position. So
Right.
black is already way outscoring white. We tried to look at some other ideas. The best scoring move, which actually scores reasonably well, is something like bishop to b2. And I think in those online games we were talking about where Carlsen had the white pieces, he played this queen to c2 idea.
Yeah, 2 different times against Giri. One thing
Yeah.
I like about this structure for Magnus, you know, for myself, when I see 4 pawns in the center like this, it's really hard to figure out who takes who, which move order. Do you take 1 pawn? Do you take 2? Which way do you take back? It's complicated. And I think even at the international master level, whites and IM, I think it's tough to figure out which pawns do you take. And this allows maybe Magnus to show that extra positional understanding. What do you do with all this pawn tension?
Yeah, I mean, just for example, not suggesting that this is any good at all, but like a possible pawn structure could be like, for example, like captures, and takes. You're playing against an IQP, or maybe you don't take here and you play this and you end up with this pawn structure. There's all kinds of structures that could happen here. Say we make a random move. It could be the case that like we take, and you could take back with the knight and end up with like this kind of a weird structure. I
Yeah.
mean, who knows what sort of pawn structure you're going to end up with.
There's probably like
But
8 different pawn structures that are possible out of this.
yeah, there's so many. And so I guess in a way, you have to sort of try to evaluate the kind of structure that you want. But this bishop d3, I think, like, one of my first chess books was that Logical Chess Move by Move by Chernev.
Mhm.
And he spends a lot of time talking about these kinds of pawn structures and delaying the movement of this d3 bishop, or sorry, the f1 bishop, because black's maybe going to take here and you don't want to lose time. But I think we're going to see a consistent theme in this game that white just mismanages their light squared bishop, because Carlsen immediately captures, and then I have to move the bishop again. So
Yeah.
essentially, I just given up a tempo, and I could have done something more efficient with that time. Like, like Magnus's queen c2, then take, then here. And now I've got queen c2 for free in this idea. So instead, bishop d3, Magnus does take, takes back, and now queen to c7. Again, already signing up, realizing that this c file is going to become quite weak because there's no pawns on d2 or b2 to help. And it's not easy for white to maneuver much of a counterattack here on the queen side.
I think there's 2 things that are kind of building up in this game so far that Magnus is kind of showing how he can outplay his opponent. Number 1, it's moving the minor pieces too many times, right? So we're just starting to see that now with bishop d3, bishop takes c4 by white. The other one, though, is figuring out where to put the pawns. And if you watch how Magnus plays this coming up, he does just a masterful job focusing on minor pieces, pawns, and how you can combine them together.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, knight d2 is such a weird move. I would not really consider that. I suppose his idea is that he wants to stop knight e4. He wants to defend the bishop because black does have a threat of just capturing, and then we have problems with our bishop. But I still feel like that's quite odd. To my mind, if you have to move the knight, I kind of like this idea. The computer's not a huge fan, but I thought that something like this might be potentially interesting. Of course, I'm trying to find a better way to invoke what white ultimately tried to do in the game, but I thought something like this made some sense. We get a capture, takes, and after takes, we at least get some kind of an imbalance over here. And the black kingside structure is going to be somewhat disheveled, but I still think black would be happy for this.
And I think if you're prepping for Magnus Carlsen and you're lower rated by a couple hundred points, in his past, his track record has been he struggles when lower rated players go all out and attack his king, right? He doesn't like that. So I think it makes sense for white to play for this big attack. One thing that I wanted to note here is this bishop already moved twice. The knight is now moving twice with knight back to d2. But if he doesn't do that, he has to move this bishop again, most likely, which is a third bishop move already.
I mean, he could play something like queen c2 or queen d3.
I was thinking maybe queen e2, something that kind of stood out to me, but there's this refutation, pawn to b5. It's just crazy.
Yeah, the pawn to b5 is not obvious.
Working rook and king.
Yeah. And the queen, since the queen's not on d1, the rook on a1 would be hanging in that line.
Right. Okay,
so knight to d2 happens, and I kind of like the idea because I like these structures. So he just castles, and then he strikes with f4, and this is kind of a structure that you can get out of the Carlsbad, but you want that knight. The knight belongs on e5 here. The knight, he has this sort of Stonewall structure. The knight belongs on e5. This bishop belongs on d5, and this bishop should have been traded. This bishop on c1 should have been traded and should be off the board. So like all of his minor pieces are kind of in the wrong place for the structure that he's going for. And I think the eval tells that perfectly.
I think just focusing on the c1 bishop, as a Stonewall player from the black side, you don't want to play a Stonewall with tension in the center and no pawns essentially locked up. Would you ever create this e3 weakness with no pawns locked up? Probably not, right? The reason we play the Stonewall is there's a pawn sitting here on d5. So now how does this bishop ever get into the game? He's going to have to go bishop d2, bishop e1, bishop h4. He's creating his own problem here with the bishop on c1. And really, this is completely unnecessary. I think he should almost maybe even admit his mistake and try to get this knight back moving forward again. But yeah, I'm really not a fan of f4. This definitely puts the game in Magnus's court.
Yeah, Magnus immediately jumps with knight to d5, which is quite. I mean, it's a nice active square. It attacks a couple pawns that aren't defended, and I think this is the point where White really goes wrong.
Mhm.
This bishop on c4 is critical in the Stonewall because all it's not just your good bishop; it's like your super bishop because you have all these light squares that it can move around on, and he just opts to just get rid of it and then replace it with a pawn. So now your light squares are we've just pinned in our knight, and we don't have this beautiful possible attacker. Which when we have the Stonewall, we're looking for these ideas. We're looking to bring our queen out, our rook up, and this bishop would potentially support all that wonderfully.
And
So
oftentimes in the Stonewall, the other player will actually take 3 or 4 moves with this knight back here, and they'll play b6, bishop a6, you take, knight takes a6, and then they'll retreat the knight back and move it again. Like they'll waste a lot of time just to trade light square bishop for light square bishop, but with colors reversed. And here White is saying, oh, I'll just give you this bishop and open up your bishop at the same time. Here you go, Magnus. I don't have the bishop pair anymore. I lost my good bishop. I'm opening your bad bishop. Let's see how you beat me.
yeah, so instead of capturing, I realize that you've got a couple hanging pawns, but I like this idea knight to e4. The point is that the knight is defending this pawn. We've opened up our bishop to play this pawn, and we keep our minor pieces on the board, which is what we want. This knight's greatly improved on e4 as opposed to d2. And if we look at just some natural play from black, so for example, say b6, intending bishop b7, now we can play bishop d2, defending this guy, possibly making this route out to
Mhm.
get this bishop some activity, and then say bishop b7. Well, now you could hit f5 immediately, and our position starts to make a lot of sense. We're chipping away at this e6 pawn, and we have a nice bishop lined up here. This knight's possibly going to support perhaps later an f6 push. Our queen can come out. We have plenty of squares to lift our rook. Like this would be an ideal way. Now, granted, we didn't give perfect play for black here, but this demonstrates that there's some life in the position if we leave our pieces on the board.
And you
But
gave
after,
natural moves for black, right? b6,
yeah,
bishop to b7. That's a natural way to get that bishop out with the pawn on e6. And that attack was really good. Okay, so now let's look at this bishop takes d5 move. E takes d5 played, queen to
uh-huh.
h5. Okay, so
Ooh.
Gillen's going for the big attack. He's going all out. And I know you're not a huge fan of this move, are you?
Yeah, no, not at all. Like, so I get, okay, the queen is the most powerful piece, but what's it going to do all by itself over there? I mean, like, find me a route to get this bishop to get these pieces into the game. What am I'm going to play here and then here? No, Magnus not going to allow that. He's just going to play f6 as he does in the game. When am I going to come here and then come to the h file and checkmate you? No, I got a bishop here. It's going to stop that. How are you going to get this bishop into the game? Well, I'll just sack every pawn I have. And then, no, like there's no foreseeable way that that queen's going to get any support. And so
Okay, I'm going to
I
play
really,
devil's advocate because we have the advantage of stockfish in our analysis currently. I
okay.
think, going into this game, we were analyzing and we were both critical of Queen H5. But the more I look at it, the more I'm starting to think like, okay, your rating is 2396. You are
Mm-hmm.
almost 500 points lower than Magnus, and you're in a bad position already.
Yeah.
Now you have two options. You can kind of sit back and try to hold your weaknesses and play, Stockfish best. And maybe you even know it's Stockfish best, right? But you
Yeah.
are definitely getting crushed by Magnus if you just like wait for him to beat you on the queen side. Or
Mm-hmm.
you roll the dice, you go all out, knowing you may lose in the next 10 to 12 moves, but you have that very slim chance, like, okay, maybe Magnus messes up because I'm going for the attack. I know lower rated players have beat him with crazy attacks, and let's just make it dicey and see what happens. Like, nothing to lose mentality.
Well, you know what? If you want to go for a nothing to lose mentality, I have a move for you.
Okay,
Okay.
let's see it. Let's see it.
Again, this is further it's showing that white just mismanages both light squared bishops, not only his own, but Magnus's also. Note
Yeah,
how well Magnus controlled black's light squared bishop when he was on the white side of this. I like this move f5.
I like it too.
That's
Yeah, and we're going to see why coming up. Magnus,
I'm yeah, I'm threatening f6. I'm preventing your bishop from coming out, and I'm giving myself some more space, some more options to lift my rook. I can play knight f3, maybe go e5. And remember what Magnus did when he got pawns at e5 and f5. It was slaughter time. So if you want to do something that's sort of all out and outrageous and going for broke, I think f5 might have been the way to do it.
Here's a line we didn't look at too. After f6, trying to blockade this pawn, e4 is a little bit interesting. I see c takes d as kind of crushing it now with Stockfish, but I was looking at this line. If d takes e, and maybe they could somehow use this idea, queen to b3 check is in the position, kind of taking advantage of this light square diagonal. Knight comes back to take. You know, maybe something along these lines like f5 and e4, but obviously Stockfish is saying don't play e4 immediately there. But I kind of like that idea as a way to like get rid of that backward pawn and try to attack that way, which would also open up this bishop to the king side.
Yeah, so h4 is played, or queen h5, and Magnus has a pretty clear plan. He is just going to slaughter on the c file, which is what you're supposed to do when you're playing against the Stonewall.
Yeah.
Playing, in the last game, he played such principled chess. We saw that e4 break, and here, he's just playing really principled chess. He captures, takes, opening the c file, and like we have two weak pawns here, two incredibly weak pawns that he's going to go after.
That's one of the really cool things with watching the Olympiad. Like, when do you get to see Magnus play against someone 2390, right? Like, we don't get to see these super GMs just show nice kind of technique that we can understand. They're always doing these weird little nuances in the opening. But this is just, textbook play. Like you said, attack the Stonewall down the C file. There's no C2 coverage. White would love to have that bishop on D3, like you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, if there were a bishop on D3, queen H5 would at least come with a threat.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So C takes, opening up. We don't want to take, usually in the Stonewall, we'd like to take this way, but that just leaves this pawn way too backwards. Granted, maybe it's going to open up our bishop for us, but this just can't function. So he takes this way, knight to E7. Again, we're already threatening something like here, which would attack this rook and this pawn. So he's got to do something about this. Chooses knight to F3 so that this bishop is at least defending. And now bishop to F5. Ta-da! My bishop has arrived on the board. There's supposed to be a white bishop on this diagonal, and Magnus has totally flipped the script and has his own bishop there. Also explaining a little counterpoint to why he played this knight to E7 idea.
And I think having the bishop on F5 is one of the main reasons White can't get their attack going. That bishop on F5 helps guard H7. There's no light square bishop for White. And then what Black does coming up is really instructive. Magnus says, okay, my best piece is actually going to be this bishop, which is technically the bad bishop, same color as this pawn. But he's going to park the bishop on E4. And from this square, look at these two diagonals that it reaches, right? It's just controlling White's position. And Magnus's worst piece, the D7 knight, is actually going to get traded off by White's worst piece, the D2 bishop. And then Magnus is going to show how to shut out this knight. So it's going to be a good bishop against bad knight in the end. Like, this is just really good play by Magnus coming up.
One more small point about this bishop is it defends H7.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So, F6, saying you will not move this knight forward. This knight will do nothing useful. So knight H4, I'm going to chase away the bishop, but fine, I'll go plant it here. And this is actually, again, another nice squares. I'm preventing you lifting your rook. I'm just choking off your ability to bring pieces to the king side. So now he tries F5. The idea is he's going to open up the F4 square. But now this pawn's a bit of a liability now because it's already attacked twice, and which is going to restrict the movement of these three pieces that are all defending it. So he chooses, Magnus goes rook AC8, just going to pile up on the C file. Bishop B4, saying, I got to get rid of this bishop. But once you get rid of this bishop, all of these squares are really, really, really weak. And that's going to come back to haunt White. All he was thinking about was getting rid of his bad piece, but he didn't really look at the dynamics and what was going to happen on the queen side.
Yeah, this was all in for White. Having that knight stuck out on H4 and then going for this idea of trading bishop for knight, it's not good because White only has two attackers over here. Magnus can easily defend the king side. And like we've talked about, Magnus controls the c file in combination with this bishop. This was just completely the wrong idea. I think the knight should have stayed back in the center more, not go for this bishop for knight trade with the knight out on the rim. White's just
White,
too all in on this attack.
yeah, white probably, and you keep calling it an attack. I'm not sure what it is. I think it's more just like king side piece shuffling. I don't see any attack.
Okay, but here, let me ask you that. Let me ask you this. Let's say we were to play, like, ignore Stockfish. Let's say we were to play like a 10-game match where we just keep switching colors. I think this kind of position, like, even though I can see it's a minus 3.5 Stockfish, I think it's a little closer, maybe at like the 2300 level. You know, white's an IM 2390. I think this type of play can work against other 2300s a little more often than someone like Magnus, who's closer to Stockfish.
I think that you're confusing 2300 level with 300 level.
Oh, jeez.
I think that any good 2300 in the world is going to win as black every time.
All right.
So he executes his idea, gets rid of his bishop. The queen gets out of the way, which actually sort of helps Magnus because now we're attacking this a3 pawn and we've cleared the way for a rook. We get rook to f4. Sir, where's your rook going? What do you? Let's say you put it here. Do you even have a threat? No. So I'm going to move my knight and then put it here, and then I'll have a threat which I can parry in one move. So like this move does nothing.
Here's one idea.
Okay, what's your idea?
Rook g4, knight g6. You decide I'll take g6. I take back. This pawn's defended. You pass. Check. Here, checkmate.
Oh, so if I give you a free move and I decide to take your knight, which I'm under no obligation to do.
Yeah, that was multiple free moves and bad moves.
Yeah. So
okay,
yeah, rook c3, just pouncing on these weaknesses. Rook to e1, defending one, but you know, getting rid of the other. Where's this idea that you had, Matt? When did he find time to do this? Because I haven't seen it yet. Takes, and now your whole mating idea is not even mate now because I can run out.
Yeah, I think I need like maybe 5 moves now, free instead of 3.
Yeah. Rook to g4, which like, you know, when he played rook to g4, he's like, well, I guess I got to make a move.
Yeah, at this point you're lost. So you got to go for this.
Yeah, it's over. Rook, and the game's over in like 2 more moves. Magnus finds a really cute way to finish the game off. He plays rook to c1, and you've got no good choice but to take the rook, right? And so he takes, and you know, probably, I mean, just taking back the rook immediately is enough. But he doesn't even bother with that. He captures here in between. The king cannot go to the corner because then this is mate. So the king's forced to come out to f1. But you know what? This is also mate.
Yeah, really nice checkmate. Okay, I have a better idea for white though, I think.
Okay. All right. You're still
let's keep let me get this attack going, JD.
Quit trying to convince people this is a good way to play with white.
Turn your engine off. Turn your engine off.
Okay, I don't that? You control that.
Oh.
All right, go ahead. All right.
Do you see engine?
Right. Nope, nothing. What do you got?
Queen h6.
Queen h6 right here?
Yeah.
All right. Say, okay, at the very least, we'll say rook takes.
King f2.
Okay. What do we want here?
Good question.
I mean, I could just do this.
Yeah, maybe.
You mean, yeah, maybe. At the very least, I can do this.
Yeah.
And
but I'm not getting mated in too, and I'm trying to mate you, I guess. But yeah, you're right. Magnus would probably either play that or he would find the best response.
Yeah, I don't know what the best response is, but at the very least, this has got to be winning for black, right?
It's actually close to best. Yeah, this is like minus 10, and this one's minus 11. So
yeah. So wow. Yeah, I refuted your idea without the engine.
Yeah, nicely done, nicely done. So great game by Magnus. We see the reverse side of this QGD structure. And again, Magnus is just playing super strong positional chess. I think he's on form. Like, even though he's facing players that are a little lower rated than he's normally facing, it's showing like he's beating them very cleanly. He's not struggling to outplay these guys.
Yeah, definitely. So you want to take a look at the standings to see how everybody's doing?
Yep, let's jump over to that. Okay, I got the round 5 standings up, and we have
Yeah. So Iceland, sadly, they lost today. They're down in 59th place. They lost to Croatia 3-1. Norway actually, despite having crushed today, they won a half to 3.5. They're still 34th place. Do you think there's any hope that by the end of it they'll improve that?
I think so. Yeah, I think Norway's definitely got a chance with Magnus leading them. I don't think they'll be a top 10 team though at this point, to be honest. I think they'll kind of be near the front and maybe they'll play a couple top teams in the later rounds, but I don't think they'll finish top 10 at this point.
Yeah, my other beloved Serbia, they beat Indonesia today, 2.5 to 1.5, and that boosts them up to 25th place, which I think Serbia is probably pretty happy with 25th place. Then India 3, that's a team you've been following a lot. They beat Chile today, 2.5 to 1.5, to bring them up 22nd place. Are you feeling good about where India 3 is, or do you think they deserve better?
I think India 3 is doing about how I would expect. It's India 2 that I'm really excited about, and they're
Yeah,
first
we'll
place
get.
right now, 17 and a half board points. The team they're
Yeah,
tied with, Armenia, only has 15 board points.
yeah. I don't want to talk about it.
You can't stop India 2, JD. You can't
Can't
stop them.
stop India too. The U.S. won today thanks to Lanier. We had a pretty close win today against, or pretty close win today against Israel. We had draws on the top 3 boards, and Lanier brought it home for us on the 4th board.
Second time. Yeah, he's
Yeah,
done it twice now. MVP right now for the US
yeah,
team.
yeah. He's probably on score or on pace for an individual medal on board 4.
Yeah, I
Tell you
think you're.
who's not on pace for a medal is Caruana. Like,
Ooh.
he's had a loss and a couple draws. He's not pulling his weight. I know he's a light guy. He's not very heavy, but like he's just not pulling his weight.
Well, in his
So
3 draws, all the opponents were in the 2500s. And his only
yeah.
opponent 2600 plus he lost.
Do you think he's still brokenhearted about the candidates? Do you think that's what the problem is?
I mean, there probably is a huge letdown. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if there was some, psychology that's lingering after that event. Um,
Yeah.
One interesting thing is I thought more teams after today would be tied at 4.5 points. Really,
Yeah.
there isn't. So we have 2 teams on 5, but on 4.5 points, we only have 5 teams. So Uzbekistan, India 1, US, Cuba, and Iran. What do you think of Cuba's run so far? They were the 32 seed and they're tied for 3rd place.
I'm glad we stole an R from them, or they might be beating us.
Yeah, I mean, that would bump their average rating probably about 50 points because it's like a 200-point gain spread across 4 boards.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and if Lennar hadn't taken care of business when he did, seriously, if you take the wins that he gave us and give them back to his native Cuba, they're probably doing better than we are.
And they have an impressive 15 and a half board points too, which is 2 more points than the US has.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So we got India still. They beat Romania today, 2.5, 1.5, and that brings them up to 4th place. So the 2 India teams are really rocking. They have 2 teams in the top 4.
Yeah, and what about the medic team? Oh, England, yeah. 1.5
England?
to lost to Armenia, 2.5 to 1.5. You know the medic flag?
Oh, yeah, 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 yeah.
They
Yeah,
lost
England.
for
Yeah,
2.
England. They're being led by Mickey Adams, who is not a young guy anymore. Actually, a lot of their team is not necessarily young guys. They've got kind of an old school team that's been around for a long time. They're all strong 2600s and some former 2700s, but yeah, they don't. There must not be much young blood in England these days.
I think they'll bounce back though. Like that experience will pay off. I do think they'll be kind of a top 10 team in the end, and they're sitting in 8th place, so they're not doing too poorly.
Yeah, 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 yeah. If only they had Nigel Short, then if they had Nigel Short, they'd win on every board every round, right?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, they might be watching rugby. I gotta check the rugby schedule to see what lines up with the games.
Yeah, yeah.
Cricket,
All right.
maybe. Yeah.
So looking forward to round 6. That'll be good. I wonder if Magnus is going to produce another beautiful, principled, classical game for us to learn from.
If you keep showing those games, we'll keep replaying them. That's
Yeah,
just
yeah,
great
yeah.
play by Magnus.
Yep.
All right, so I think that wraps up today's recap. Thanks, JD, and we will see you all for tomorrow's round. And I think we have a break on Thursday, so one more game and then an off day. All right, see you
Yeah.
tomorrow.
Bye, guys.